The dream was finally real. 60 days. That's all it would take. The Atlantic crossing problem solved forever by one American engineer. 7 days after that triumphant New York Times headline, the entire financial world collapsed. Everything Armstrong built was swept away overnight. October 29th, Black Tuesday. The stock market lost $14 billion in a single day. Investors vanished. Armstrong's 60-day dream died instantly. This is the man who spent 42 years trying to build an airport in the middle of the ocean. His name was Edward R. Armstrong. Born in 1876, Armstrong understood the crisis of transatlantic aviation before most people knew airplanes existed. The ocean was a wall. In 1913, no airplane could fly more than 500 miles without refueling. The Atlantic crossing was 3,500 miles of certain death. Armstrong's solution? 8 floating platforms, each 350 miles apart, stretching from New York to Europe. Stepstones across an impossible sea. Each Seadrome would be 1,200 feet long, 400 feet wide, standing 70 feet above the water. Columns plunging 270 feet below the waves. The Seadrome wasn't just a runway, it was a 40-room hotel, a casino, a bar. In international waters, Prohibition didn't apply. These are the actual engineering drawings Armstrong filed with the United States Patent Office. Look at the detail. He's solved problems no one else had even asked. In 1928, Armstrong built a 1/32nd scale model and tested it on the Choptank River at the DuPont estate in Maryland. It held steady against waves. Lindbergh endorsed it, Blériot endorsed it, DuPont invested, General Motors invested, even Hollywood put money in. Armstrong had the world's attention. Charles Lindbergh had crossed the Atlantic alone in 1927, but his single flight proved the route. It did not solve it. Armstrong would solve it. Imagine boarding in New York, stopping 8 times across the Atlantic, each stop a floating hotel, arriving in London refreshed, not exhausted, not dead. The 8 platforms would create the world's first transatlantic air highway, 3,500 miles, 8 stops, a permanent American presence in the middle of the ocean. Armstrong's key insight: waves only affect the top 100 feet of ocean. Deeper columns feel nothing. The Seadrome would be calmer than any ship in any storm. Total cost for all 8 Seadromes, $32 million. Today, that's over $500 million. Enormous then. But the Panama Canal cost 10 times more. In 1930, Popular Mechanics published a full feature on the Seadrome model. America was paying attention. Congress was asked to pay for it. October 22nd, 1929. The New York Times announced construction would begin in 60 days. Armstrong had finally done it. 7 days later, Black Tuesday. The Great Depression wiped out every investor. In 1933, Armstrong asked Roosevelt's New Deal for $30 million under the NIRA, rejected. In 1934, Roosevelt briefly considered it. The Navy reviewed it. Officials studied it. Then the moment passed. Armstrong kept pushing, alone. While Armstrong fought bureaucrats, Germany launched the Hindenburg. Regular transatlantic Zeppelin service began in 1936. No Seadromes needed, for now. The Hindenburg disaster on May 6, 1937, killed 36 people and ended the era of transatlantic airships in a single moment. May 6, 1937. The Hindenburg burned in 34 seconds. The Zeppelin era died. Armstrong's floating airports suddenly looked essential again. Pan American's Boeing 314 Clippers started transatlantic service in 1939. Flying boats that could land on the water. No Seadromes needed, temporarily. Then, in 1943, the US Navy proved Armstrong was right. They built a floating runway from 10,920 pontoons, 1,810 feet long in the Pacific. World War II changed everything. military technology had created aircraft that could cross the Atlantic without stopping. Armstrong's entire premise had been eliminated. These photographs show what killed the Seadrome. Not politics, not money, not the Depression. Technology simply grew wings and flew past Armstrong's solution. Armstrong refused to quit. He proposed military Seadromes for Cold War air defense. The Air Force studied it. Then jet engines made even that redundant. Edward R. Armstrong died in 1955, 80 years old, 42 years of relentless work. Not one Seadrome was ever built. The ocean remained empty. Armstrong wasn't wrong about the engineering. He was wrong about the timeline. The world solved the range problem before he could solve the funding problem. But Armstrong's idea didn't die with him. Look at what came next. 3 different countries, 3 different decades, all tried to build what he imagined. 1999, Japan built it. The Megafloat project, a 1-kilometer floating runway in Tokyo Bay. Aircraft actually landed on it. Armstrong was right. The Megafloat worked perfectly. Stability confirmed. Aircraft operations confirmed. 86 years after Armstrong's first patent, the concept was finally physically proven. The Netherlands went further. A circular floating airport that could rotate 360 degrees into the wind. Cost 90 billion euros. Parliament said no. San Diego, California, 1993. The city needed space. The bay was right there. Float Inc. proposed a floating airport. The Navy said, absolutely not. The Navy was clear. San Diego Bay was their territory. Aircraft carriers come first. A floating commercial airport would block their strategic access. Case closed. 2008, London Mayor Boris Johnson proposed a new hub airport in the Thames Estuary. 4 runways, no neighbourhoods under the flight path. The press called it Boris Island. The Davies Commission studied Boris Island for 4 years. The Thames Estuary was a critical bird migration corridor. Environmental objections were overwhelming. Rejected in 2015. In 2020, Uflatia proposed the OPLEX, a $20 billion self-sustaining floating airport with solar power, aquaculture, and a marina. Nobody funded it. Every decade since 1955, someone has tried to build what Armstrong designed. Japan came closest. Here is the visual proof that it can actually work. What if Armstrong had succeeded? 8 platforms across the Atlantic. Imagine stopping mid-ocean, having dinner, watching stars from a platform in the middle of nowhere. If Armstrong had secured funding in October 1929, just 7 days earlier, the Seadromes might have been built before long-range aircraft made them unnecessary. The Seadromes would have been more than airports, weather stations, rescue bases, navigation beacons, and yes, open bars during Prohibition. During World War II, mid-Atlantic Seadromes would have been strategically invaluable. Allied air bases against German U-boats controlling the shipping lanes. The irony? The US military eventually did build floating runways, just not in the Atlantic. In the Pacific, where they desperately needed them in 1943. Today, very large floating structures technology has solved most of Armstrong's engineering challenges. The ocean platforms are buildable, right now, today. Singapore is running out of land. Hong Kong is surrounded by water. Tokyo Bay is right there. The case for floating airports has never been stronger. Climate change adds a new argument. Coastal airports are being swallowed by rising seas. Floating airports can't be flooded. They rise with the water. Kansai Airport in Japan, built on an artificial island in 1994, is sinking. It has dropped nearly 4 meters. It is costing billions to fix. Kansai Airport spent $20 billion building on a sinking island. Armstrong's floating design would have been cheaper, more stable, and would never sink. Modern floating structure technology has advanced enormously since Armstrong. Carbon fiber, computer-controlled stabilization, real-time weather response. The engineering is solved. The problem has always been the same since 1913. It's not engineering, it's not the ocean, it's political will, insurance frameworks, and the courage to fund the unprecedented. Singapore and Japan are actively studying floating runway extensions right now. The money exists. The technology exists. What is missing is one government's decision. The floating airport future is being built right now, not in aviation, but in ocean engineering. These structures exist today, operating, generating revenue. Armstrong's vision, an Atlantic highway of floating islands. Imagine that world. 8 islands that didn't exist. 8 islands humanity chose not to build. Tokyo, Singapore, Mumbai, Lagos. Every megacity hemmed in by water is looking at the ocean with new eyes. What was once science fiction is now engineering. Modern floating airports could be zero carbon. They don't disturb the seabed. Marine life colonizes the columns. They generate wave energy. Armstrong never imagined this bonus. The final question Armstrong never stopped asking: why build on land when you can build on water? In 2024, the answer still isn't clear enough for governments. From 1913 to 2024, 111 years of trying, 6 serious proposals, 0 floating airports built. The world's most patient idea is still waiting. Edward Armstrong looked at the ocean and saw a highway. Most people look at the ocean and see a barrier. That single difference in perspective changed everything. Imagine the descent, runway lights in the middle of nowhere, nothing but ocean in every direction. A landing unlike any landing in the history of flight. An airport in the ocean, without noise complaints, without land, unlimited runways. Armstrong dreamed it in 1913. We are still deciding if we deserve it.